Steam Deck launched with a pretty simple premise. Take your PC games and put it over there. There was just one problem. It wasn't officially available in Australia.
Well, Valve has now decided that Aussies are worthy of their handheld gaming PC, which begs the question, is the Steam Deck still worth it, or has the market changed enough that it's not worth bothering with?
From the moment you open the box and start setting it up, the Steam Deck is going to feel unlike setting up any PC you've had before. Valve's put a lot of work into making the Steam Deck experience feel more like a console and less like a PC. Well, other than an out-of-box update a la modern Windows. Once you're logged in, you're presented with a quick tutorial on how to navigate SteamOS, and from there you're ready to start installing and playing your games. But first, it's worth looking at how you're going to be playing these games. If you're familiar with the Nintendo Switch, the Steam Deck isn't going to be foreign to you. There's a screen flanked by a set of standard console controls. A D-pad, a pair of joysticks, a couple of shoulder buttons, buttons for navigating SteamOS in your games, and a set of action buttons in the Xbox-style layout. There's also 4 paddle buttons on the back, which can be customized to do whatever commands you want quick access to, and a pair of haptic trackpads, which not only can work as a mouse, but also function as a D-pad, macro pad, or joystick, as you wish. Unlike the Switch, however, there's actually enough thickness to comfortably grip the console, and many of the more commonly used controls are moved to the top. There's a Thunderbolt-compatible USB-C port on top. There's also a 3.5mm headphone jack capable of supporting a headset on top, and finally a microSD card slot on bottom. This all surrounds the display. I opted for a top-spec Steam Deck, which means I have a HDR-capable, anti-reflective OLED display running at a whopping 1280 by 800.
If you don't understand how low resolution that is in 2024, this is a MacBook from 2006, and it runs the same resolution.
But to be fair on Valve, lower resolutions like this mean you can get better performance, nicer looking games, and higher frame rates with lower end hardware.
But all the hardware in the world doesn't matter if you don't want to play games on the Steam Deck.
Thankfully, gaming on the Steam Deck is, largely, a positive experience. One of the first games I tried on the console was Valve's own Desk Job, a Portal spin-off which honestly feels like an Aperture Science-themed version of the PlayStation 5's Astro's Playroom. Not necessarily a bad thing, but it's mostly just there to get you used to the more unique aspects of the Steam Deck's controls. I followed this up with Forza Horizon 4. Not 5, which I do own, and we'll get to later in this video. The Horizon series is one of my favorite mindless chill-out games, where I want to play something, but I don't exactly want to pay too much attention to it. The first time I tried it, annoyingly off camera, it felt weirdly sluggish, despite getting high frame rates reported both in-game and through Steam's performance monitor. I eventually dropped a few of the settings down to their lowest, and that seemed to fix things, but it isn't a great first impression. Part of the issue may be the games I was playing, however. SteamOS, if you're not aware, is a platform based on Linux, which means that typically the majority of Windows games won't work on it. Normally. Valve has been putting a ton of work into getting Windows games working on Linux. Not just over the last couple of years with Steam Deck, but going all the way back to 2018. I tried Linux gaming back then to check out Proton, Valve's compatibility layer, and while it was certainly a mixed bag, it was impressive how well it worked. Add 6 years of development and a lot of single-player Windows games will work pretty well. Valve, to their credit, includes rankings for compatible games. Verified for games which should work perfectly, playable for games which may give you some issues, and unsupported for games which outright shouldn't work.
That said, all this testing is done by Valve, and it feels inconsistent at times.
Take the Ascent, which is considered suboptimal, largely because its default settings don't necessarily run well on the Steam Deck. Which is fair enough. But the Doom reboot is considered a full-on works great on Steam Deck game, but ran horribly on its defaults. Another good example I found while trying to test something else, Hotline Miami brings up a launcher that you can't use with a controller. Sure, you can use the touchscreen, but compared to some of the issues that drop some other games down to playable, I don't know that I'd rate this as a full-on verified game. SteamOS also typically won't give you information about why a game is listed as unsupported. Most of the time you'll get a dubiously useful message about how Valve is working to get support on the game. To Valve's credit, you can still install unsupported games and test your luck, but I wish I could find out why. Apparently I'm gonna have a bad time before I download them. Other games won't necessarily work the best on the Steam Deck's 16:10 screen. Yakuza Zero, for instance, will letterbox pretty much everything other than actual gameplay. One of the other things you're often going to run into compatibility issues with is older games. I've been in a Vampire the Masquerade's Bloodlines mood because my friend is looking to run the tabletop game. My Steam Deck, on the other hand, was not. Or rather, Vampire is such an old, janky game that any PC with more than about 2 gigs of RAM won't run it without a mod. A mod which won't easily run on the Steam Deck since it needs to be installed with an installer. On the other hand, the slightly older, if less janky, Deus Ex ran well, but natively won't work with the controller. Thankfully, Valve followed this almost a decade ago with the launch of the Steam controller, which, paired with modifications to Big Picture mode, brought with it the ability to easily map keyboard and mouse controls to a gamepad. And if that's too much effort, you can even download other people's configurations.
If all you care about is playing Steam games on the Steam Deck, then you can probably skip this chapter. But if, like me, you have a lot of games through other marketplaces or even other consoles, that's where the Steam Deck can start to come undone.
It's not impossible to run non-Steam games on the deck. There's even an entire section in SteamOS for it, but out of the box the only option you'll see is Google Chrome. Thankfully, tools exist, so you can get non-Steam games running on the deck with minimal difficulty. Heroic Games Launcher is a tool designed to be an alternative to Epic Games Launcher and GOG Galaxy, and it also brings Proton support to both those platforms. I started out by trying Cyberpunk 2077 because I was morbidly curious about how well a game that's notoriously poor performing would go on the Steam Deck. A couple of hours of babysitting the deck so it wouldn't go to sleep later, and it turns out it works fairly well. I'm not too surprised. I knew Cyberpunk had a preset for the deck, I just still didn't expect the game not to be a dumpster fire. I mean, it even shows Steam controller prompts despite the fact I'm not running it through Steam. I also gave The Witcher 3 a try, partly to see how a game that's maybe not got the same optimizations for the deck was going to run, partly because it's a third-person open-world environment that's great with a controller, and partly because I frankly enjoy the plot. And it performed pretty well. Better than when I first tried it on Linux back in 2018 at least. In a similar vein to Heroic Games Launcher, EmuDeck is here to make emulation easy. And if you don't need to deal with BIOSes, it is. It's just not efficient. Put aside a bit of time to set it up if you're going to play around with it. Otherwise, EmuDeck is fine. You can add individual games to your Steam library, or just a separate launcher, which you'd probably prefer if you have more than a couple games you want to emulate.
And I suppose if there is a game you want to play that isn't available on SteamOS, you can run Windows on it. You just probably won't want to.
And now, a few nitpicks, annoyances, and other things that won't really fit anywhere else in the video. For instance, it would be nice if the Steam Deck had a stand built in, like a Switch, but the case is a nice addition, especially on the 1TB model where you get the option to take out the inner liner if you don't need all the protection. There's even a spot for the Steam Deck dock, though curiously there's nowhere to put the charger. As I mentioned earlier, the Steam Deck has a USB-C port which can allow it to connect to an external screen, including your TV. So you can use it to stream games from your PC like a modern day Steam Link. And unlike the Steam Link, when it doesn't work, you can just play a local game. This would be a lot easier, however, if the Steam Deck dock was available in Australia at all. At the very least, you can use the Steam Deck with third-party options, but it's a bizarre thing not to have available down here. Being a Linux computer also means Steam Deck has pretty solid controller support. Everything from the de facto PC standard Xbox controller to a DualShock or Switch pad to even the full-on arcade stick or a keyboard and mouse, if you want to. While the Steam Deck is obviously a portable console, it does still rely on the internet a decent bit. One of the most obvious things is just there are certain games that need internet connection. Mostly because they're multiplayer, but some games also just need you to go online for their first launch. Speaking of downloads, there's no way to download games while the Steam Deck is in sleep mode, which is annoying in general, but feels almost malicious with the OLED. The only way to get the screen to go off while downloading is to either plug in an external display or switch to the desktop, which I really shouldn't have to on something that's trying hard to be a console. And it's even more annoying as the Steam Deck's sleep mode is genuinely impressive for x86 hardware. Sleep is near instant, and if you turn off the startup animations, you'll probably be back into your game almost as fast as you'd be into your phone. Valve also proudly proclaims the Steam Deck is easy to repair, and not only officially provides repair guides through iFixit, but also OEM parts as well. Unfortunately, the most common parts you'll need to replace, the screen, battery, thumbsticks, and SSD, are all considered moderate to difficult repairs. And if I'm honest, I still don't know how much I love enabling Valve's pseudo-monopoly on PC games.
But those are all relatively minor things in the grand scheme of things. With the deck finally being available without upcharges that put it to the same price as its competitors, it represents a great value. If the idea of unshackling your PC games from the desk is appealing to you, and you're already invested in the Steam ecosystem, then Steam Deck is definitely worth checking out. Except things have changed quite a bit over the last 2 free months. Perhaps the most important thing is my friend has actually now run Vampire. Good game, would play again. But the other, I guess, kind of big thing is that Valve and Lenovo have announced SteamOS is coming to third-party hardware. In fact, Valve has just recently released a beta that's designed to be ran on third-party hardware, and I think this is great news for consumers. Personally, I think many of the Steam Deck's competitors have really interesting hardware just let down by Windows. Officially allowing third-party hardware means we get more options as consumers, which I think is great. I just kinda wish I waited now.